more times than not, sequels fail to live up to hit movies. And at best, they can be, adequate and carry on a successful franchise that hopefully gets resolved in a satisfying way for its audience. But when you start out with a huge bang like Star Wars was, well, boy, it's tough to follow it up, isn't it? They succeeded, and more so, where pretty much, for the most part, I think it's largely agreed that The Empire Strikes Back is the absolute best of the Star Wars films. And I'm in that camp. As much as I have huge affections for the first movie and love for it, Empire is a whole different animal in a lot of ways. And it's fascinating how it fits in with the story. It doesn't deviate, and yet it does. I mean, it amps up the level of what the previous movie had established as this, fun adventure. Certainly there's darkness to it, but not quite what you're getting in Empire Strikes Back. And things get very, very serious in this film. So the opening is always affected me in a way. It's just something about that with the fleet, the Imperial fleets deployed, and they're shooting out their robot drones to seek out the rebel base, and it's just such a cool means by which the movie opens. And it's all this machinery doing it, and for a while they're holding the scenes once again, because you get a lot of this from Star Wars, besides all the creatures and whatnot, but just these droids, and it's just a cool, rather sinister but quiet in a way opening for this thing, and for these sinister droids looking for our heroes who are in hiding since they destroyed the Death Star. And there's of course there's a time jump of sorts. We don't really know how much. I don't know if there were novels and comic books and whatnot that kind of established in between stories here, but some amount of development has taken place here, and so you can forgive certain abilities. Luke Skywalker demonstrates his force powers here when he's attacked by the abominable snowman and reaches out to get his lightsaber to save himself. And we didn't really see much of that in the original movie about what were the powers of the Force. So we saw Obi-Wan with his ability of the lightsaber. We saw him able to use the Jedi mind trick. But as far as, grabbing things like that, the only example would be when Darth Vader was strangling the arrogant general in the meeting room at the Death Star. I find your lack of faith disturbing. And so, obviously he's squeezing the guy's throat without actually touching him. So that's the only example of that. But here we see Luke reach out to his lightsaber that's stuck in the snow while he's hanging from the stalagmites in this the abominable snowman's cave. And he grabs it, and it jumps to his hand and all that. So that's a demonstration that there's been some progress for Luke. He's gained some more insight and establishments there, and it's forgivable in that you didn't see this development so much so in the first movie, but that some time has passed. Now he communes with Obi-Wan's spirit, and he sees him in this film here, and but I suppose one could draw the conclusion that this may have happened before, in between the films. And that this is something that up to this point is somewhat unique to Luke and the Skywalkers, I suppose, whereas it's established now with the prequels that Obi-Wan had to get some training from Yoda in order to be able to see Force ghosts, and he was going to talk to Qui-Gon Jinn apparently on Tatooine and what have you. But Luke and the Skywalkers, apparently, that Skywalker blood, the Force is so strong with him He doesn't even have to try. This is one of those things where he just sees it. So, Obi-Wan's able to speak to him, and the Obi-Wan spirit is speaking to him in the previous film. So it's an interesting little tidbit. I don't know if that was ever covered either. No, this is the first time he actually saw Obi-Wan in his spirit form. But certainly he's able to communicate with Obi-Wan even though he's dead. And so a certain amount of training could still continue with Luke learning more abilities as he studies the Force. So that's an interesting little thing there. So right off the bat, the thing about the second film in a trilogy where the hero is introduced and he has his first glorious victory, and then in the second act, everything goes to crap. It falls apart. You got to knock him down. You can't let him get arrogant because that's the path to the dark side. And so this is, to strip it down to the simplistic nature of it, this is what Empire provides you with. Luke is going to have his ass handed to him here. And lose a hand in the whole thing. And it's part of the suffering in that he gains his wisdom the hard way, and that's usually how it is gained. It doesn't just magically happen, like in some other films I could mention. And so this is part of the hero's journey that Luke must undergo. Now, knowing it now by stories about the discussions about whether or not Darth Vader was Luke's father, that wasn't the case initially. In fact, there were some plans where the spirit of Anakin would appear to Luke in this film, and at some point along the way, someone came up. I don't know that it was George. I can't remember exactly. You can probably find other YouTube videos that have done better work on this and got that story down pat. But inevitably it gets there. And of course, it works so much better than it would have if he wasn't. And it brings in a drama to the overall story. And of course, the story is what? Well, of course, with the prequels, it's 6 chapters. It's the redemption and a tragedy of Anakin Skywalker. And in this instance of the 3 final films here, his son has to save him, and that's his salvation, his son. And so that's what the story becomes, and it gives it a better grounding, rather than, well, here's a hero who gets vengeance or justice for his dead father and that sort of thing, which it would have been otherwise if Vader was, just a bad guy and that's it, and it would go forward with that like that. But this gives it far more gravitas to the overall narrative of the Star Wars story. So we get the romance between Han and Leia. It's difficult. She can't believe she's falling in love with this man, but she is, and she's in denial almost to the bitter end, where it looks like, oh boy, it's all over for Han. And of course, the classic exchange, which speaks volumes of the relationship. Finally she says, "I love you," and his response is, "I know." But that actually, in the filming, they said, I think the original line was, "I love you too," or something like that, and they say, well, is that really Han? And probably, I don't know if I heard it correctly, if Harrison's the one who came up with it or whatever, but it's more in fitting with that guy. Even though he's pushing the romance initially, he's, you feel something for me. And she's like, oh, get out of here, and all this sort of stuff. And then in the end, the roles are pretty much not quite reversed, really. But she flat out says it, and he's, I know. I mean, but, he's admitting, what it is, but it's just the way he is, So, all good stuff. We get a new character in Lando Calrissian and all that stuff, and at first seems to be a villain, but here's a guy who has to quickly redeem himself because he's got this chance to save his little organization there from the Empire, and this is his want, but he's got to sell out his friend, and ultimately he can't go through with it. And so that's the redemption of Lando. And of course, he puts his life on the line to retrieve and save Han Solo, and it ultimately destroys the second Death Star, of course, in the next film. And Boba Fett. Boba Fett was this character at the time in between the films. There was this contest. I forget what the deal was. I remember that, where you could send in so many proof of purchase or whatever, and you could get the new Star Wars character action figure. And it was this Boba Fett character. And when he gets there and he's like, well, he didn't really do a whole lot. It just goes to show that Darth Vader is willing to outsource beyond his own crew to get the job done. And so Boba Fett, of course, captures Han Solo in this, and the princess and all that. But Boba Fett he was cool looking, and of course stories about him develop outside of the movies, and so on and so forth. And so we got more of him in the prequels, where well his father really, but so it rounds out an interesting story for him. And it's too bad we won't get more of that, because I don't know what's going on. There's that rumor about the rights are not entirely Disney's, so they want to drop Boba Fett and invent their own version of Boba Fett who looks just like Boba Fett and hangs out with the same people as Boba Fett did. You know. But there you go. And it's interesting thing about where they have these planets like Tatooine that are outside the reach of the Empire, and the Empire just can't afford to police everything and just doesn't care about those planets. And I suppose if Tatooine became more valuable, they would wipe out Jabba the Hutt's operation there. But for the most part, they're just letting the criminals run the show, and they don't care. Even to the point of dealing with them, with Vader does here, and he knows all about it. He tells Boba Fett, you can take Han to Jabba, and all that stuff. So that it's interesting little tidbits you get here and there about how that galaxy works. And so we get more details here. Well, we already know it, but in the narrative now set by the prequels of who the Skywalkers are and all this sort of thing. The Emperor appears and says, "Oh, we have a new enemy." Then Vader, of course, says, "How can this be? Such a feelings, Lord Vader." Well, yeah, his feelings indeed. And they're very much on display here. And this is pretty good body language, because that's all you got with the guy in the suit, where, there's this scenes of somewhat sadness in Vader here when Luke doesn't, he decides to try to kill himself rather than join Vader, and you can just see it where his hand drops, and he's like, oh, gee. And then later, when he figures he can capture the Millennium Falcon, and yet R2-D2 figures it out, and they get the hyperdrive going, and they escape. And then it's just that he hangs there, he's devastated, and he's like, I almost had him, and it's obvious, he's not interested really in turning Luke over to the Emperor, and he's saying, hey, we can make a deal, we'll team up and we'll overthrow him and all that. He's still, in the dark side here, but my son survived, this is his only connection to Padme, the love of his life and all this stuff, and this is, and it's sort of the opening crawl. He's obsessed with finding Luke Skywalker, who destroyed the Death Star and all that. Yeah, it's not about the Death Star. It's about it's him, and he loves his son, and it's already there. That's what's gonna turn him. And the body language, you can see that where his head hangs, and he's already too depressed to kill the Admiral, because the Admiral lives till Jedi. And he was wiping out admirals and generals all over the place, getting upset with them. And all that. But just magnificent performances here, great direction, just the whole thing, and a lot of ways just through the emotion displayed there that gives to the theater the overall story here. Which sets Luke on the path of the man he wanted to kill is now the man he wants to save more than anything else, even against the wishes of his mentors and Yoda and Obi-Wan. Yoda, this is the interesting thing where they did this with all just a puppet, and even though it's like, oh man, it's not going to work, it's going to come stupid, it's like Kermit the Frog is the Jedi Master, it totally bought it. You know, it just worked. I don't know what it is. It just did. I mean, the voice you first hear it is like, oh, come on. It just works. And, of course, the swamp set was almost a real swamp. You know, they built the whole thing in the soundstage and everything, but they actually had real animals living in it because it was so well done. And, of course, one of the great aspects of Star Wars was, of course, John Williams' score. At the time, it was somewhat considered that they might just use the music of the times and, you know, weird synthesizer crap that they had in the 70s back then. Oh, God, that would have dated the movies. I don't think it would have worked, you know. I wouldn't even remember it by now. But, of course, the soundtrack, one of the most memorable tunes and all that. And then, boy, how do you top that? Well, he did. We get the Darth Vader Imperial March theme and all that. And then other aspects like the songs, the music for Yoda and all that, you know, gives the gravitas to his wisdom and his teachings and all that sort of thing. And then, of course, the asteroid chase of the Millennium Falcon is just magnificent. And the whole thing. Boy, I tell you, this is one of those rare moments where a sequel not only does well and doesn't ruin the overall narrative, because sometimes that can happen with sequels, it bests a movie that's almost perfect in a lot of ways. And they managed to do this with this story, and not just because of the remarkable revelation that the villain is actually the hero's father, which is sort of a soap opera element, really, but boy, does it really capture the moment there. It's, what? And all that. So, all well done. And of course, with suddenly the villain is now the hero's father. He's been having this. His father was his hero in his mind, and he fantasized that he was the son of a great hero and all this stuff. And suddenly, oh no, he's actually a monster. And still, he's going to risk everything to save him. And that's the touching part about it. But the revelation, that is how you subvert expectations, Mr. Johnson. So there you are. The Empire Strikes Back remains and probably always will be the absolute best of Star Wars. And that's that. Not that anyone should initially try to best it, but they should at least try to do a good job. And who knows, you might actually stumble into something great. But at this point, it's too late. Yeah, it's all very sad. But for a moment there, a moment in time, we had greatness. Thank you for watching and listening. Say, why not like and subscribe, and check out that link description below. That'll take you to my mini stores that have plenty of goodies for you.